Hello and welcome to our Syxsense webinar. Today, we have our industry expert, Blaise Fello, here to give us an inside look into a comparative breakdown of patch and vulnerability management. If you have any questions, please add them to the chat and Blaise will reach out after to answer those. And with that, Blaise Fello.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me today. Let's start by talking about patch management, so we can then begin to get into the differences of it versus vulnerability management and why having both are important. Both play a vital role in keeping our systems secure, but they address different aspects of the cybersecurity landscape. So let's get started. In my previous life, I was a sysadmin, and anytime patch or vulnerability management came up, I would cringe. On its own, without the proper strategies, tools, and expertise, security improvement is a very challenging obstacle to overcome, both as a supplier, like an MSP, or as part of a team within an organization. We at Syxsense aim to make those processes simpler by bringing both patching and vulnerability remediation together under a single pane of glass, unifying systems, security, and other IT teams. Why is this process so complicated? Recently, Syxsense assisted in the development of the State of Vulnerability Management report done by the Cybersecurity Insiders. The results were based on a comprehensive online global survey of 421 cybersecurity professionals conducted in June 2023 to gain a deep insight into the latest trends, key challenges, and solution preferences for vulnerability management. The respondents range from technical executives to managers and IT security practitioners, representing a balanced cross-section of organizations of varying sizes across multiple industries. If you'd like a copy of the report, please reach out to the individual who invited you today. What I want to call out from it here is that no matter what your current security strategy or posture you have in place today, you are not alone. What we at Syxsense do is help to improve that process or posture by holistically improving your environment, as staying ahead of threats and using best practices become more and more time-consuming and resource-intensive without the proper solution in place. So why are we here today? We're going to discuss the difference between patches and vulnerabilities, how Syxsense can help you achieve your goals, and what happens when patches or vulnerabilities go unaddressed. You can see here that 24% of the 421 professionals surveyed indicated a breach within their environment due to an unaddressed vulnerability. So how do we begin to address what is in our environment? We'll start with patch management, which primarily deals with the process of identifying, acquiring, testing, and applying patches to a software and/or systems. These patches generally take the form of software or system update packages, which can include, but not always, a security fix. It can also have feature improvements, compatibility updates, or bug fixes, just to name a few. The goal is to address known vulnerabilities so that your patch risk assessment is low or gets lowered over time. An important additional feature with Syxsense is a device inventory, so you know what devices are currently active within your environment. Patching is only half the battle. Vulnerability management encompasses a broader spectrum of activities, including the identification, assessment, prioritization, and mitigation of security vulnerabilities. This involves not only applying patches, but also implementing other measures to reduce the risk associated with vulnerabilities. This continues through the entire life cycle of the environment, including proactive measures such as vulnerability assessments and other means to identify potential weaknesses before they are exploited. One of the many hurdles that comes with management of both patches and vulnerabilities is they are generally handled by two different teams. Generally, the IT department, which includes systems and network administrators, handles the patching and vulnerability remediations. The information security team, generally overseen by the Chief Information Security Officer or CISO, sets the security strategy and works across the organization to maintain implementation. This team usually includes security analysts and engineers who are tasked with identifying, evaluating, and mitigating vulnerabilities. As mentioned before, they collaborate with the patch management team to remediate vulnerabilities and bolster the organization's security defenses. As mentioned earlier, Syxsense makes this process easy by unifying patch management and vulnerability remediation under a single pane of glass. This allows for better coordination and collaboration among teams, reducing the likelihood of overlooking crucial patches or vulnerabilities. With automation and customization, we can help maintain an effective patch management strategy that can scale with your environment and reduce costs by bringing patch and vulnerability management under one solution. Now, let's see how Syxsense can put those words into action. But first, here's some quick contact information. So here's our console in real time. And you can see just by logging in, the first thing you see, you can get information returned to you about your environment and what it looks like. Your dashboard is highly customizable. So depending on what type of project you're looking for or working on, you can switch between them and customize it to return results that you would like to work on. So something that I like to always reference is something like you can add queries to the bottom of your dashboard. So if you're doing specific work to reduce your overall vulnerability count over time, you can have that pop up right at the beginning. And then you can see that count go down, similar to with patches in that same vein. But also one of the biggest cumulative updates that you can do to reduce those types of vulnerabilities or patching within your environment would be like a Windows 10 version breakdown, making sure that the computers are always up to date to the latest feature update, and you can have that idea returned to you right here. And if anybody does happen to fall out of the version that you like to have as your baseline, it'll show up here. And so I always use this one as an example of somebody pulling out a computer that's been in their desk for about 6 months or something along those lines. And you're like, okay, why is this device within my environment? I can then click on it to get more information like the device host name. And maybe that gives me the information I need about whose it is, but even go a step further into that device and I can start patching it immediately, or again, get more information about that device and then start improving it and again, making my environment more secure. The most important part of, I would say, developing a patch management solution would be to set up a good patching strategy. And that comes in line with automation. So I'm going to go down here to Cortex, which is our no script drag and drop workflow builder. And what that means is pretty much what it sounds like. No script, meaning that you don't need to pre-develop a script for it to do work. These actions on the right-hand column here are all available for you to use. And drag and drop is simply the means in which we move those actions into the workflow. So if I want to do an initial inventory scan to get that metadata of that physical device that is within my environment, so I can start doing work to it, like with queries or organize it in other ways, this is that first initial step to get that information. If you already have scripts that you already work with that you really like to use, you can implement those as well. You can see in this action where I can just drag this over, which will allow me to copy or paste the script that I've created, or you can upload it to the software repository and drag and drop that into the workflow as I build it out. But we're going to make this a pretty high level type of provisioning workflow. So the idea would be to get those devices that join the network in your environment to whatever baseline you would like to have them set as. So after we get this inventory scan, we can do a patch scan to get that information in if we don't want to do any work to it, or we can do a patch scan and deploy, which we will obviously do work to that endpoint. So I'm going to drag and drop this deploy into my workflow. And of course, it's going to ask me what type of patches I want to apply to that particular workflow. And so I can do our default queries. We have a list of them here, something like the critical patches. You can also create your own query depending on what you want to work with within this particular workflow. So you can see I have one of last month patches. If you have something like you need to approve or exclude certain patches, you can use our patching group option here. And if you're looking to do a particular patch, maybe like a 0 day or something along those lines, you can specify that under specific patches. But again, as a high level demonstration, I'm just going to use all to push that out with the concept of getting that new device all patched up where it's supposed to be. Now, the next step is after the patches are applied to that device, I want to get a security scan going. I want to understand what types of holes are in that device and what I can do to mitigate them either now or over time. And again, just like you saw with the patch scan, it's asking what type of vulnerabilities it would like to scan for, whether it be a custom query or something specific or a group of specific vulnerabilities that it's looking for. Again, I'm just going to select all. I always like to select all because environments are always changing. So just because you did work one day doesn't mean that work would carry over to the next. Maybe somebody accidentally changed some things in the settings, or something got misconfigured, or perhaps one of the updates or patches you pushed out actually changed one of those vulnerability mitigations, and so the vulnerability returned. So I always like to have an all in here unless I'm hunting for something specific. But again, since this is high level, it also makes sense to have it as a scan all. So that's actually it. That's a very basic workflow I created. And actually, I could actually push this out and set it as a policy to start working within my environment as needed. But obviously, I don't really want to stop here. I can add extra items and also understand how these things link together. So right in the middle here, you can see that maybe I am up to date and I don't have any patches I need to deploy to it, but it'll get stuck here. So how do I join this to the security scan? All I have to do is click this green bullet to select it, and then select the other green bullet to join it. And that shows that whenever the work is done here for either success or none, it will continue through to the next step of the workflow. If I needed to remove that, if I accidentally clicked it, all I have to do is click that bullet until I select whichever flow I would like to remove, and then I click in the white space, and now it's gone. Easy as that. Now, one of the most common things that happens after you patch a particular system is a reboot is needed. And so how do we deal with that? We have a few different options here. If you like to be heavy-handed or you're working on a particular device that doesn't have a user tied to it, you can just reboot it now. Or there's this option to reboot with a custom UI prompt. So I'm going to add that to the end here. And you can see it returns what a specific message is you would like to add to it, just so the user knows who it's coming from, as well as the company logo. And here are some timers and other checkboxes, which you can customize however you'd like the user to see it. And once it's all said and done, you can click the preview button, and this is what will be shown to the user whenever it pops up. So they'll know what to do whenever that work is going to be done to that device. So with that same idea, maybe you're doing certain patching or vulnerability remediation to, let's say, a server or an executive's computer, and you need some type of approval or something along those lines. We do have an option which is called email approval, which does just that. And so with this, you can add in your domain, and with that, we'll just do user@domain.com for the time being. And so you can use this variable that's shown right here. I'm just going to type in device name for now. And so what this will do is it'll return the host name of the device in which it's doing the work against. And so what will happen is you or whoever that user is that you're indicating within that email will receive an email saying that endpoint 1, device 1, server 1, what have you, needs to do work. And then you can explain that out within the email body, and then you can just approve it to move forward within the workflow. But since we have it at the end of the workflow, we need to move it to the front. So how do we do that? Just like I showed you before, you just click on that bullet to remove that link, and then you drag and drop it to the front. And now on approval, I can now go into the beginning of my workflow, and now the work can get going. And with that same idea in mind, we also have a send an email for anything that might fail. So if the patch scan and deploy fails, you can add an email in here, which maybe sends a ticket to your ticketing system at domain.com. And with that same variable device name, you can create a ticket indicating that it failed at the failed to deploy updates. And so now, instead of worrying about a bunch of individual machines, wondering if they're patching or not, you have this visibility and this workflow built to continuously make sure that your devices are at that baseline that you would like it to be set to. And if any of those problems occur, now you only have to work on those outliers where perhaps there's some error that's occurring on that device that is preventing it from deploying the patches. And so now you can just work on that one-off one. You don't necessarily have to waste time or spend time with individual machines trying to catch them up whenever they all they need is a button press to move forward or something along those lines. Once you understand these concepts, you can build it out into more complex types of workflows. So something like this provisioning example I have, you set this as a policy. And so what's the problem with, always like to talk about the idea of images. Images are a static set of time. And so during that time, all the patches you have applied to it, all the vulnerability remediations you have to it, remediations applied to it are good for that date. But as time moves on, that stuff gets out of date. And so this is a way that you can continue to have something like the latest software installed on your machine or the latest patches installed on your machine. And so you can build it out that way where it's doing your inventory scan, like we start with, and then some service checks. I have a firewall check here just as an easy example. And then some software installers and some checks like that. And then one of the manual processes that was part of a vulnerability remediation that we were doing was we were manually enabling BitLocker. And with human error, part of that, not all the devices got caught all the time. And so it was always a negative experience whenever I would find one where it didn't happen and it wasn't, and it was like out in the world outside of my building. So this is an easy way to get visibility, because not only with the inventory scan, which inventories those devices in which you can query which ones have BitLocker and which ones don't, now I can just enforce it and know that it's actually going out there. I have something proving to me that something like that is getting enabled. And then after that's done, you can do some extra cleanup at the end here and move it forward. Additionally, you can do something like automated patch deployment. So we do work for the three major operating systems. We're primarily a Windows based, but we do also do patching for Linux and Mac. And so you can create a workflow that looks like this, where essentially you've built one workflow to do work against many different devices. And so again, with that patching idea in mind and getting that to a state where you can kind of set it and forget it, or at least just be mindful of it and making sure that it's working as appropriately as it needs to be, you can create something like this to kind of work through and not only set the patches, but also do some cleanup and some checks to make sure, something like your disk threshold is where it's supposed to be, which is important with, servers or perhaps some development computers or something along those lines. So that's a great strategy for patch remediation, patching within the environment setting. You can set that against maintenance windows for however you'd like to schedule that out. But pretty much we're wondering, what are these types of patches? What are these vulnerabilities we're looking for? So I'm going to jump up here to vulnerabilities. And within vulnerabilities, we have our patch and vulnerability library. For our patches, you can see we only show 1,357 in there. There's a large number of superseding patches, but what we want to do is get you to the most secure that you can be today, the quickest way possible. And so we're not necessarily going to worry about the older types of updates or cumulative updates that you don't have. We're going to get you to the most recent point as quickly as possible so that you are secure for today's types of threats that are out there. You can also see that we have some third-party patching in here as well. I have a query that shows we cover 105 of those third-party applications. And so, excuse me, there's many more than 105 out there, but we do cover most of the basic ones. And within Cortex, we also have a software store, which also uses, we're also able to utilize it to get a bunch of the latest updates out there as well. So there's a few different ways we can get third parties up to date. Those are just the really simplified ways of describing and showing how we can do it. So we've talked about patches a lot so far. So let's get into security and what we have here. So this number count, you can see we scanned for 3,310 total vulnerabilities. Some of the obvious ones that we search for that companies like to try to achieve in terms of their posture would be the CIS benchmarks in reaching CIS level 1 or level 2. And here is a great way to check and help yourself, help your environment get to where you want to be in regards to those levels. However, you can see over here that, the severity isn't really too critical. So, you might be wondering how we rank certain severities within our environment. So I'll go down here to Windows configuration. And you can see we have a number of different types of ratings, as you can see here. Some of them are NA, where some of them are also high or low. This is obviously the CVSS severity, which has their own way of grading. And then we also have Syxsense's severity, that if this particular vulnerability is found within your environment, what we rank it as, so that if it is found, maybe you should resolve it, because it actually is a pretty impactful type of vulnerability if it is discovered. So how do we go about remediating with Syxsense? A couple months ago, we had 0-day 36884 come out. And Syxsense was unique in that we provided this remediation to all of our customers so that they were able to remediate it within their environment. If you were, let's say you were stopped in the hall by an executive asking about, hey, I saw on the news today that a 0-day came out. Do you know what we're doing for it? Or if we're affected? Here's a really quick and easy way to find out those answers. And you probably would have already checked it whenever you came in, or you would know just give me a second, I'll go and check it out. Here you can see just how threatening this particular vulnerability is to your environment. You can see severity and the CVSS score, and that is active, weaponized, and we're all public aware with a countermeasure available. So that means we're aware of this action, but we can also take steps to protect our environment. With that in mind, what devices do we have to start, looking into to do work to? You can see listed down here, I have 25 devices with that vulnerability in which I have to remediate. I have 2 that I have not yet checked, and 1 that is already secure, whether it's already patched or it's not required for that particular device. So once I've done that scan, which we've done in Cortex already, in order to fix this issue, I can click down here to resolution workflow. And now that we've already kind of went through Cortex, hopefully this page makes a little bit more sense to you in terms of what actions are taking place here. Essentially, we're doing a pre-check and a post-check, making sure that this particular vulnerability is still relative to that endpoint. And so this would say, please do the work to this device, and this would say the work is done, so you can remove it from that type of the inventory scan for it. And then this is the actual work that's being done to that endpoint. And so within here, you can see the actual work that's being completed. Our content team came up with this 176 lines of codes so that you don't have to. We have this remediation in place to save you time and effort, and also join your teams together so that you can understand what type of work is being done within your environment, and you can then approve it. And again, since it's Cortex, you can add these other actions if you would like, and then you can save, which would approve that workflow to then be usable within your environment. So once you've saved it, you can go back up here to summary. And if everything's approved and we're ready to push this out, all I have to do is fix security issues. And now you can see all the devices that have that particular vulnerability are listed here. and what type of vulnerability is being remediated over here. And this is also the time and how often you want to repeat it. But all I would have to do is click run now in order to push that into my environment, and that work will be done, and I'll be able to get a return of the devices that were able to be completed with that work against it. So this would be kind of like an ad hoc task. You can also create a Cortex workflow referencing that security resolution so that you can build a continuous workflow so that if this particular vulnerability comes back in the future, you can have it self-heal in terms of performing the remediation at that time again, so that if a configuration changes, it will just automatically remediate it, so you don't necessarily have to worry as much about that particular hole being exploited. If you need more information about what work is being done with this particular vulnerability, you can click on this link, which takes you to our content base, which has a description of the vulnerabilities that are within our vulnerability library. You see the name is up here with an overview and description of what it is, then the impact of that particular vulnerability if it were to be exploited within your environment, and the solution. So this is the work that you would have to do if you only had a scanner. They would detect this type of vulnerability in your environment. Maybe they'll give you this answer or show you where to go in order to find the information to do the repair within your environment. But again, Syxsense, what sets us apart from just a vulnerability scanner is that we do this work for you so that you don't have to. And again, you have a single pane of glass to look for that type of resolution, so you don't have to necessarily bounce between different resources with your teams. Your IT security team could just send this particular remediation information to your your systems administrator or your network team or your IT manager for this type of remediation, saying, hey, this is the fix that we'd like to implement. Here's how we'll do it. Yes or no, kind of a thing. So it just makes life a lot easier because it's all everybody's looking at the same thing. So once you start doing this work, maybe you want to get reporting to make sure that the work is being done, and you want to justify that the work you're doing is being effective. There are two important reports that I like to reference, which are risk assessments. So I'll just search for risk assessment, and you see we have patch risk assessment and vulnerability risk assessment. So if I were to run the security patch risk assessment, you can see that this report shows that I have a very low patch risk assessment. So what that means is that my patching strategy is very effective. My devices are mostly up to date, and they are continuously up to date. So the actions that I'm taking here are very positive. And so that's a very good strategy that's been implemented. So you might think, again, with just patching mindset, that I can go home, my environment is secure, I'm all patched up, and so I must be safe, right? Well, so that's where the security vulnerability risk assessment comes into play. The patch risk assessment is essentially setting you up for that baseline that the manufacturers or developers kind of have for the known vulnerabilities that they are aware of, and the patches indicate the fixes and repairs that they were able to perform within their software. But it's always this kind of unknowns that kind of pop up, and that's where the vulnerabilities come up. And now, once I run the vulnerability risk assessment, you can see it paints a little bit of a different picture. You can see that I have 6 critical and 88 high vulnerabilities within my environment. And so the idea here would be that this isn't necessarily the worst thing. I mean, unless the particular critical ones are really bad. But the idea is that, okay, we've now quantified, we've established this idea of security within our environment. We have these numbers of actionable items that we can that we now have control over to remediate. So now over time, the idea would be to get this graph lower and lower, so that, for now, yes, we have 6 critical, but maybe the plan would be to get, 5 critical by next week or next month or something like that. So during auditing or something, you can use this type of report to show the improvement over time, where you are and where you were. And then you can use that trend as to where you're going to either keep a very successful strategy or to show improvement that you are continuously improving your environment. Similar to redirecting your resources with that mindset as well, depending on how you have your inventory, your devices set up. You can also show which areas, which departments, or which particular sites might be more problematic than other, that might need more attention. And so you can see here, I've developed my grouping by departments, and you can see that perhaps I would need to put more emphasis on my engineers because they have more vulnerabilities found within their environment. And if you're looking for the top 10 detected vulnerabilities, we also have this here. So now you can create a strategy to start mitigating those types of high numbers within your environment. And then there are some other ones that I like to reference as well. So if you're looking to hunt for particular patches by device, so something that you can share with executives as well, as you can look at all the devices within your environment, and then you can also look at the patches that are applied to them. And so for you, the systems administrator is probably implementing this, or the analyst that's looking at the types of patches that are being that need to be applied to the endpoints. This is very informational, but we also have an executive option where it just shows that first page, which shows a number count. So, the executive doesn't have to necessarily worry about those types of patches, just they're interested in the numbers. You can show that number going down over time as well. So the last thing I'll go into is our devices. And so we're multi-tenant by nature. So depending on how you'd like to set up your network, or your devices within the console, it's very easy, and there's a few different ways we can streamline this. If you have different VLANs, so different subnets within your environment, you can organize each site by a specific subnet. But if you have multiple customers, we have a way to provide a script that will automatically, whenever that device is joined to our environment, it will automatically place it into the device group in which you would like to have it in. And so these are the different sites that I've set up to show that I can put devices and do work to a bunch of individual customers or departments at a specific time. But then we also can query specific devices to do work to those as well. But then we can also group them together. But if you already have it set up in Active Directory, we can sync with Active Directory as well, which is shown here. And then you don't have to do all that extra work. You can just reference your domain and build out it either the same as what's in Active Directory, or you can just utilize the work that's being done within that option. And with that, that is the end of my presentation. So I'll hand it back to the team to finish up our webinar, and thank you for listening, and thank you for your time.